Lila Carter had never been one to seek the spotlight. At 29, she was content to blend into the background, her life a quiet rhythm of routine and small joys. She lived in a modest apartment above a bakery in the coastal town of Havenport, Oregon, where the salty tang of the sea mingled with the scent of fresh bread every morning. For the past 4 years, she'd worked as a waitress at the Driftwood Diner, a weathered little spot perched on the edge of the pier. It wasn't glamorous: grease-stained menus, chipped coffee mugs, and a jukebox that hadn't worked since the 90s, but it was hers. The regulars knew her name, and she knew theirs. That was enough. Lila wasn't ambitious in the way people often expected. She didn't dream of climbing corporate ladders or escaping Havenport for some glittering city life. Her goals were simpler: keep her elderly neighbor, Mrs. Delaney, company with a weekly pot of tea, save enough to fix the leak in her ceiling, and maybe, one day, take a trip to see the redwoods she'd read about in a library book. She'd grown up in a trailer park just outside town, raised by a single mom who'd worked double shifts at a cannery until her hands were raw. Kindness, her mother had taught her, was the one thing you could always afford to give. So Lila gave it freely, even when it went unnoticed. The Driftwood Diner wasn't a place that rewarded kindness, though. The owner, Mr. Hargrove, was a gruff man who cared more about profit margins than people. He'd inherited the diner from his father and ran it like a sinking ship, cutting corners, skimping on repairs, and barking at the staff whenever the numbers dipped. The head waitress, Carla, was his enforcer, a sharp-tongued woman who'd been there for a decade and treated the diner like her personal fiefdom. She favored the loud, tip-heavy tourists over the quiet locals, and she had no patience for anyone who didn't play by her rules. Lila, with her soft voice and habit of lingering at tables to chat, was a constant thorn in Carla's side. It was a foggy Tuesday evening when everything changed. The diner was nearly empty, the usual hum of conversation replaced by the steady drip of rain against the windows. Lila was wiping down the counter, her auburn hair slipping loose from its ponytail, when the bell above the door chimed. A man stepped inside, shaking water from his coat. He was in his late 50s, with graying hair and a weathered face that suggested a life spent outdoors. His clothes were plain, a faded flannel shirt, jeans, and scuffed boots, but there was a quiet dignity in the way he carried himself. He didn't look like the usual tourist crowd, with their selfie sticks and expensive rain gear. Carla, perched near the register, barely glanced up from counting tips. "Seat yourself," she muttered, her tone clipped. The man nodded and slid into a booth near the back, his movements slow and deliberate. Lila watched him for a moment, noting the way he rubbed his hands together as if trying to chase away a chill. Something about him tugged at her, maybe it was the faint slump of his shoulders, or the way he scanned the room like he wasn't sure he belonged. She grabbed a menu and a glass of water, ignoring Carla's pointed sigh. "Evening," she said warmly as she approached his table. "Rough night out there, huh?" The man looked up, his hazel eyes meeting hers. "You could say that," he replied, his voice low and gravelly. "Just passing through." "Well, you picked a good spot to dry off." She set the water down and handed him the menu. "Can I get you something warm to start?" "Coffee's fresh, well, fresh enough." A faint smile tugged at his lips. "Coffee sounds perfect." "Black." "Coming right up." Lila turned to head back to the counter, but she paused when she saw him pull a crumpled photo from his pocket, a young girl with pigtails, grinning at the camera. He stared at it for a long moment before tucking it away. Curiosity flickered in her chest, but she didn't pry. Instead, she poured the coffee herself, making sure it was piping hot, and brought it back with a small plate of biscuits she'd swiped from the kitchen. "On the house," she said, setting the biscuits down. "They're day-olds, but they're still good with butter." He raised an eyebrow. "You didn't have to do that." "I know." She shrugged. "But you look like you could use it." For a moment, he didn't say anything, just studied her with an intensity that made her shift on her feet. Then he nodded. Thank you. Lila smiled and left him to his meal, but she couldn't shake the feeling that Carla was watching her. Sure enough, when she returned to the counter, Carla was there, arms crossed and lips pursed. "What's with the charity case?" she hissed. "He's not even gonna tip." "He's a customer," Lila said quietly, keeping her eyes on the coffee pot she was rinsing. "That's all that matters." Carla snorted. "Keep that up, and you'll be out of a job. Hargrove doesn't pay us to play saint." Lila didn't argue. She'd learned long ago that arguing with Carla was like shouting into the wind, pointless and exhausting. But as the night wore on, she kept an eye on the man. He ordered a bowl of clam chowder, ate slowly, and left a modest tip, more than Carla had expected, judging by her sour expression when Lila cleared the table. He thanked her again as he left, his voice soft but sincere, and then he was gone, swallowed by the fog. The next morning, Lila arrived at the diner to find Hargrove waiting for her. His face was red, his jaw tight, and Carla stood behind him with a smirk that made Lila's stomach drop. "You're done here," Hargrove snapped, not even bothering with a greeting. "Pack your things." Lila blinked, her apron half-tied. "What? Why? You think I don't hear about you giving away food?" he barked. "Those biscuits last night cost me money. I don't run a soup kitchen." "They were leftovers," she protested, her voice steady despite the heat rising in her chest. "They'd have been tossed anyway. Doesn't matter. You don't decide what's free." He jabbed a finger at her. "Out. Now." Carla's smirk widened as Lila untied her apron and set it on the counter. Her hands shook, but she kept her head high as she walked out, the bell chiming behind her. The fog was thick, the pier silent except for the crash of waves below. She had no savings, no plan, and now, no job. As she climbed the stairs to her apartment, the weight of it all settled on her shoulders. How would she pay rent? What would she tell Mrs. Delaney? She didn't notice the envelope slipped under her door until she nearly stepped on it. Plain white, no name, just a single line in neat handwriting, "Meet me at the diner tomorrow. 8 a.m., inside was a business card, simple, black text on cream paper, Elliot Grayson, Grayson Holdings. No phone number, no address. Just a name she didn't recognize. Lila stared at it, her pulse quickening. She didn't know who Elliot Grayson was, or what he wanted with her. But something told her this wasn't the end, it was the start of something she couldn't yet see. The fog hadn't lifted by morning, cloaking Havenport in a gray haze that muffled the world outside Lila's window. She stood in her tiny kitchen, the business card pinched between her fingers, its edges worn from hours of turning it over in her hands. Elliot Grayson, Grayson Holdings. The name meant nothing to her, but the note, "Meet me at the diner tomorrow. 8 a.m., had kept her awake all night. She'd lost her job less than 24 hours ago, and now some stranger was summoning her back to the place that had just spit her out. It didn't make sense. Yet here she was, pulling on her coat, her boots scuffing the floor as she headed out into the damp morning air. The pier was quiet when she reached the Driftwood Diner, the neon open sign flickering weakly against the gloom. She hesitated at the door, her breath catching as she peered through the glass. The place looked empty, no Carla, no Hargrove, no clatter of dishes from the kitchen. Just a single figure sitting in the same booth where the man from last night had been. Her heart thudded as she pushed the door open, the bell jingling faintly. It was him, the man in the flannel shirt, his gray hair catching the dim light. He looked up as she approached, his hazel eyes steady and unreadable. "You came," he said, gesturing to the seat across from him. "I wasn't sure you would." Lila slid into the booth, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I didn't have much choice. You left a cryptic note under my door. Who are you?" He leaned back, folding his hands on the table. "My name's Elliot Grayson. And I owe you an apology. She frowned. For what? For last night. For letting things play out the way they did. He paused, his gaze drifting to the window. I didn't expect you to lose your job over a plate of biscuits. Lila's stomach twisted. Wait, you knew I'd get fired? Not for certain, he admitted. But I had a hunch. I've been watching this place for a while, watching Hargrove, watching how he runs it. I needed to see what kind of people work here. Who'd bend, who'd break, who'd stand their ground. Her mind raced. So you're what, a secret shopper or something? Elliot chuckled, a dry sound that didn't reach his eyes. Not quite. I own this diner. Or I will, once the paperwork's signed tomorrow. Hargrove's been leasing it from my company for years, but he's run it into the ground. I'm taking it back. Lila stared at him, the pieces clicking into place. You're Grayson Holdings. Part of it, yeah. My family's got a few properties up and down the coast, diners, motels, a couple of stores. This one's small, but it's got history. My dad built it 50 years ago. I've been meaning to step in for a while, but I needed to know what I was dealing with first. And you picked last night to play undercover boss? Her tone was sharper than she intended, but she didn't care. Why didn't you say something? I could have kept my job. He met her gaze, unflinching. Because I needed to see the real you. Not the version that knows the boss is watching. And what I saw was someone who didn't hesitate to do the right thing, even when it cost her. Lila's throat tightened. It did cost me. I've got no savings, no backup. I don't even know how I'm paying rent next week. I know, he said quietly. That's why I'm here. I want you to come back. She blinked. Come back? As a waitress? No. He leaned forward, his voice firm. As the manager. The word hung in the air, heavy and impossible. Lila opened her mouth, then closed it again. You're serious. Dead serious. Hargrove's out. I fired him this morning, him and that head waitress, Carla. They're gone. I need someone I can trust to run this place, someone who gets what it's supposed to be. Not a cash grab, but a piece of this town. You're that person. Lila shook her head, disbelief warring with a spark of hope in her chest. I'm not a manager. I've never run anything. I pour coffee and clean tables. You do more than that, Elliot countered. You see people. You care about them. That's more than Hargrove ever did. The rest, schedules, inventory, budgets, I can teach you. I'll be around for a month to get you started. She stared at the table, her mind spinning. Why me? You don't even know me. I know enough, he said. Last night wasn't the first time I've seen you. I've been in and out of here for weeks, keeping a low profile. You're the one who remembers the regulars' orders. You're the one who doesn't turn away the folks who can't tip big. You're the one who gave me those biscuits when you didn't have to. That's who I want running my diner. Lila's hands trembled in her lap. What if I mess it up? You won't, he said simply. But if you do, you'll figure it out. That's what leaders do. She looked at him, searching his face for a catch, a trick. But all she saw was certainty, quiet, unshakable certainty. I need to think about it, she said finally. Fair enough. Take the day. Let me know by tonight. He slid a folded piece of paper across the table, a contract, she realized, with a salary that made her breath catch. If you say yes, you start tomorrow. Lila took the paper, her fingers brushing the edges. And if I say no? Then I find someone else, he said. But I'd rather not. She nodded, her thoughts a jumble as she stood and left the diner. The fog was thinning now, the pier coming into focus as she walked home. She spent the day pacing her apartment, the contract sitting on her kitchen table like a challenge. She thought about her mom, who'd worked herself to the bone for so little. She thought about Mrs. Delaney, who'd told her once that courage wasn't loud, it was quiet, steady, like the tide. She thought about the diner, its chipped mugs and faded booths, and the people who came there looking for something more than food. By evening, she'd made up her mind. She called the number Elliot had scribbled on the contract. "I'm in," she said when he answered. "Good," he replied, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "See you tomorrow, boss." Lila's first day as manager started with a spilled coffee pot and a missing cook. She arrived at the Driftwood Diner at 6 a.m., her stomach knotted with nerves, only to find the kitchen in chaos. Eddie, the morning cook, had called in sick, and the new hire, a nervous kid named Sam, had dropped an entire pot of coffee on the floor. The remaining staff, 2 waitresses and a busboy, stood around, looking at her like she was supposed to have all the answers. She didn't. But she squared her shoulders, grabbed a mop, and got to work. Elliot arrived an hour later, his calm presence a lifeline as she scrambled to salvage the morning rush. "First days are always messy," he said, handing her a clipboard with the day's inventory list. "You'll find your rhythm." "I hope so," she muttered, wiping coffee from her sleeve. "Right now, I feel like I'm drowning." "You're not," he said firmly. "You're learning. Big difference." And learn she did. Over the next few weeks, Elliot guided her through the nuts and bolts of running the diner, ordering supplies, balancing the books, handling customer complaints. He was patient but firm, pushing her to make decisions even when she doubted herself. She hired a new cook, a gruff ex-fisherman named Pete who turned out to have a knack for pancakes, and reworked the schedule so the staff had breaks they'd never gotten under Hargrove. Slowly, the diner started to feel like hers. The regulars noticed the change first. Old Man Tucker, who came in every morning for eggs and toast, started lingering longer, chatting with Lila about the weather. Mrs. Ortiz, a widow who always ordered soup, complimented the new tablecloths Lila had found at a thrift store. Even the staff softened, Sam stopped fidgeting so much, and the waitresses, Jen and Marcy, started smiling at customers instead of scowling. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Then came the test. 3 weeks in, a group of rowdy tourists stormed in, demanding service during the lunch rush. They were loud, snapping their fingers and complaining about the wait, and Jen came to Lila in a panic. "They're threatening to leave a bad review," she whispered. "What do I do?" Lila took a deep breath, remembering Elliot's advice, lead with your gut, but keep your head. She approached the table, her voice calm but firm. "Folks, I know you're hungry. We're short-staffed today, but I'll get your food out fast. How about a round of coffee on me while you wait?" They grumbled but accepted, and Lila hustled to the kitchen, helping Pete plate orders herself. The tourists left full and quiet, one even slipping her a tip with a muttered, "Thanks." When she told Elliot later, he grinned. "See? You've got this." By the end of the month, the diner was turning a small profit, nothing huge, but enough to prove she wasn't sinking the ship. Elliot announced he'd be leaving soon, trusting her to take the reins. "You're ready," he told her one evening as they locked up. "This place is yours now." Lila nodded, a lump in her throat. "Thanks for believing in me." "You believed in yourself first," he said. "I just gave you the chance." 6 months later, the Driftwood Diner was unrecognizable, not in its bones, but in its spirit. The booths were still worn, the jukebox still broken, but the air buzzed with warmth. Lila had painted the walls a soft blue, hung photos of Havenport's history, and added a chalkboard where regulars could write messages. "Best clam chowder on the coast," read one. "Lila's smile makes my day," read another. She blushed every time she saw it, but she didn't erase it. The diner wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. Word spread about the little spot where everyone was welcome, where the coffee was hot and the staff didn't rush you out. Tourists came, sure, but so did the locals, the fishermen, the shopkeepers, the kids who'd once avoided the place under Hargrove's reign. Lila made sure no one left hungry, keeping a stash of day-old pastries for anyone who couldn't pay. It wasn't charity, she told herself, it was what her mom would have done. One quiet afternoon, Elliot returned. He looked older, a little more tired, but his eyes lit up when he saw the diner. "You've done it," he said, sliding into his old booth. "This is what I wanted it to be." Lila brought him a coffee and sat across from him. "I couldn't have without you." He shook his head. "I gave you the keys. You built the house." They talked for hours, about the diner, about Havenport, about the daughter in the photo he'd carried that first night. She'd been gone 10 years, he told her, lost to a car accident. "She was kind, like you," he said. "I think she'd have liked this place." Lila's eyes stung. "I hope so." Before he left, Elliot handed her an envelope. Inside was a deed, not just for the diner, but for the building itself. "It's yours," he said. "No more leases, no more strings. You've earned it." She tried to protest, but he waved her off. "I'm retiring. Moving south. This is your legacy now." That night, Lila stood alone in the diner, the deed in her hands. She thought about her mom, about Mrs. Delaney, about the man who'd walked in on a rainy night and changed everything. She'd been fired for kindness, but it had led her here, to a place she could call her own, a life she'd never dared to dream of. The next morning, she opened the diner as usual, the bell chiming as the first customers arrived. She greeted them with a smile, her heart full. This was her story now, and she'd write it one kind act at a time.